Hi there, and welcome back to our next music history episode here. The last two episodes that we had focused in on Beethoven and kind of that transition from the classical period to the Romantic period, that Beethoven really straddled these two time periods. And so we wanted to spend a little bit of time looking at him in more detail. So today we're going to sort of talk about music after Beethoven. This is going to last two episodes as sort of generalized about Romanticism. And then we're going to get into some more sort of music examples and composer examples in sort of episode 5 of this set through most of the rest. So that's kind of what we can expect coming in through here. So let's start talking about music after Beethoven. So in the world of arts, the names we give to historical periods were not always used right away. Take the term Baroque, for example. It was originally used in the field of art history and was later adopted by music experts in the 20th century to describe a specific style period in music. On the other hand, the word romantic was actually coined by the Romantics themselves. It started in literature, and by the time the first Romantic composers emerged in the 1820s, their fellow writers were already buzzing about romantic music. This tells us two important things about music after Beethoven's time. Firstly, thanks to Beethoven's influence, people began to recognize music as a significant art form. It gained a newfound respect and was taken seriously in a way it hadn't been before. Secondly, it seemed natural for people at the time to connect advancements in music with similar advancements in literature. Throughout history, literature had always been regarded as the most important and impactful art. Now, that prestige and power were also attributed to music. We can see the shift in a painting that was highly admired during the mid-1800s. The painting depicts Franz Liszt playing the piano. I'll show you this painting in just a second as we move into Romanticism, and you can sort of see it there. Their expressions reveal how deeply moved they are by the music. It's clear that their experience of the arts is quite different from the casual enjoyment of listeners in the 18th century. The painting also emphasizes the importance of Beethoven in bringing about change. Liszt, in the painting, gazes intensely at Beethoven's larger-than-life sculpture. Does it rest on the books piled on the piano, or does it loom outside the window, appearing gigantic against the turbulent sky? So let's take a look at that painting right here. So during the 1800s, Romantic literature and literary theories thrived, particularly in the first 2 decades of the 19th century. In England, this period witnessed a remarkable explosion of poetry by influential writers such as Wordsworth, Coleridge, Shelley, Keats, and Byron. At the same time, there was also a vibrant wave of German Romantic literature, although their names might not be as familiar to English-speaking literatures like Tieck, Novalis, Kleist, Holderlin, and E.T.A. Hoffmann. The impact of Romantic music was profound, as it inspired notable novelists like Alexandre Dumas, Victor Hugo, George Sand, and Daniel Stern, whose real name was the Countess Ajoulay. In the painting, you can also see opera composer Giacomo Rossini embracing violin virtuoso Niccolo Paganini. You can see them there in the back. For us today, the word romantic typically refers to love. However, this meaning originated in the 19th century and was derived from the literary movement of Romanticism. But love and romance were just one aspect of the many themes explored in Romantic literature. which also played a significant role in shaping the music of the 19th century. The Romantic movement was driven by a desire to achieve a better and elevated state of being. Everyday life seemed monotonous and devoid of meaning, and the Romantics believed that it could only be surpassed by freely expressing individual will and passion. They rejected social norms, religious restrictions, and taboos, valuing the rule of emotions as the highest virtue. Wow, that sounds a lot like today, doesn't it? The Romantics championed emotional expression as the ultimate artistic goal. Often referred to disparagingly as bohemians during the time, they embraced romantic love, led unconventional lives, and dressed in unconventional clothing. This image of the artist as a free-spirited individual still persists today, thanks to the influence of these Romantics. If you sort of think of the movie Moulin Rouge, you sort of have this dichotomy as well, where you've got the Romantics, the people who are the artists, who are falling in love, and then you've got this sort of bourgeois class, this elitist class that want to be entertained. These attitudes can be traced back to Jean-Jacques Rousseau, an Enlightenment philosopher who advocated for the importance of natural human emotions in the mid-18th century, opposing the artificial constraints imposed by society. Celebrated as a philosophical figure during the French Revolution, Rousseau provided the Romantics with the ideals of individual freedom and fulfillment, both in personal and political realms. It's worth noting that Rousseau's own music was even played at French revolutionary events and parades, as he also promoted the concept of natural music. However, there were more factors at play than just philosophical ideas. The Industrial Revolution had already begun, and as the 19th century progressed, people increasingly felt powerless in the face of the rapid industrialization, with factories, pollution, and harsh working conditions emerging under the grip of developing capitalism. The sight of smokestacks from what poet William Blake referred to as dark, satanic mills now dominated the European landscape. It's understandable that the Romantics sought escapism from the reality through their ideals and aspirations. After the Industrial Revolution, a wave of actual revolutions swept through Europe, becoming a defining aspect of the political landscape of the time. It all began with the American Revolution, followed by the momentous French Revolution in 1789, which had a profound impact on Europe, much like the Russian Revolution of 1917 would in the 20th century. These events were followed by a series of aftershocks leading to the 1848, a year marked by major uprisings in France, Germany, Austria, and Italy. Given the revolutionary atmosphere, the Romantics naturally found themselves in the role of rebels against the established order. Many musicians, like poets and painters, allied themselves with libertarian politics. Beethoven, for instance, initially dedicated a symphony to Napoleon Bonaparte, which he later named Eroica, or Heroic. In the next generation, Liszt briefly embraced a peculiar movement that combined elements of communism and religion, gaining popularity amongst French intellectuals. Giuseppe Verdi's name became an acronym for the Italian liberation movement. Richard Wagner was even expelled from Germany in 1849 for making inflammatory speeches from the revolutionary barricades of Dresden. Simultaneously, social revolution accompanied political upheaval. The traditional barriers of heredity, nobility were breached, allowing the lower and middle classes to experience greater social mobility. As an example, Liszt, whose father worked as an estate foreman, engaged in passionate relationships, one tumultuous and the other stable, with a French countess and a Russian princess. This aspect of Liszt's life was not lost on his contemporaries, as the Countess is also depicted in the picture of Liszt at the piano that we saw on the previous slide. Here, the picture that we have is meant to depict La Marseillaise, the great rallying song of the French Revolution. The Romantics had a strong desire for heightened experiences and more intense expressions, which led to a rebellion against the constraints of artistic form and genre. Artists resisted all kinds of rules and regulations, fearing that abstract concepts like beauty or decorum might hinder their spontaneity. One area this rebellion was evident was in 18th century drama, which was bound by strict rules until the Romantics challenged them. They pointed to the works of Shakespeare as example, where scenes changed frequently, tragic elements intertwined with comedy, beautiful poetry clashed with vulgar language, and noble characters shared the stage with jesters. The lively chaos and flexible structure of these plays make Shakespeare immensely popular in the 19th century. Many composers, including Mendelssohn, Berlioz, Tchaikovsky, Wagner, and Verdi, composed music inspired by Shakespeare's work. In the realm of music itself, composers worked to break down the barriers of harmony and form. All Romantic composers experimented with chords and chord progressions that had previously been considered forbidden. Starting with Schubert, their music was enriched with imaginative and innovative harmonies. Sonata form, which was a hallmark of the classical period, was treated much more freely in Schumann's piano sonatas from the 1930s. In fact, Schumann named his last and greatest sonata Fantasy, emphasizing his spontaneity on one hand while safeguarding himself against accusations of breaking the rules on the other. In this image that you see here, this is called Nightmare. This is by an artist named Henry Fuseli, and it's an 18th century pre-Romantic painter, poet, and revolutionary who immigrated from Switzerland to England for political reasons, one of his pieces of work. The supernatural and the macabre held a prominent place with the Romantic movement, as it aimed to transcend the ordinary and explore realms beyond our everyday experiences. This inclination is not surprising. Consider the Romantic fascination with the extraordinary. The painting Nightmare that we just saw depicts a horrifying incubus that materializes the realm of dreams in a visible and public form. In literature, the supernatural found its expression in works like Goethe's Faust, which portrays the magician Faust making a pact with the devil to attain a moment of transcendent happiness. Another example is Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, published in 1818. These themes also permeated the world of opera, as seen in the titles of famous operas of the time, such as Robert the Devil, The Vampire, and The Magic Bullet. In the realm of music, the newfound artistic freedoms of the Romantic era facilitated the expression of these supernatural themes. Composers delved into particular harmonies and orchestral sounds that still resonate in today's video and movie soundtracks. One notable example is the Wolf's Glen scene in Carl Maria von Weber's opera Der Freischütz, which is The Magic Bullet, a captivating depiction of diabolical conjuration in a dark forest. Composers like Verdi and Wagner created eerie music for the witches in Macbeth and the ghostly ship crews in The Flying Dutchman, respectively. Additionally, in his fantastic symphony, Hector Berlioz composed a movement titled Dream of a Witch's Sabbath, which shares thematic similarities with Fuseli's Nightmare. In the Romantic era, there were several general traits that characterized the art of the time. These included a Shakespearean spirit, an individualistic outlook, an emphasis on emotion, and a disdain for established conventions. In this climate, artists made new attempts to merge different art forms together. Poetry became more musical. Paintings and musical works were given poetic titles, and poetry, drama, music, and stagecraft converged in Wagner's groundbreaking and highly influential total work known as Gesamtkunstwerk, as we'll talk about in the future. Within each individual art form, artists cultivate blurred effects. They played with half-obscure verbal meanings, employed ambiguous shapes, and blended colors and created musical sounds that were imprecise but rich and evocative. Among the artists of the time, J.M.W. Turner, an English landscape painter, pushed these artistic boundaries even further. In one of his most famous works, The Fighting Temeraire, the grandeur of nature and the harsh realities of industrialization merge in swirling, almost abstract combinations of color. While Rousseau had admired nature for its simplicity, Turner aimed to capture its sublime quality, the awe-inspiring and mysterious aspects of nature, its vastness, and even its potential threat. The great Romantic artists gazed unflinchingly at the infinite and sought to depict it in their art. Music held a unique and esteemed position precisely because of its boundless nature. People believed that music had the ability to convey their inner experiences more profoundly than any other art forms because the musician's imagination was not constrained by the meaning of words, as in poetry, or the depiction of objects, as in paintings. This perception led philosophers of the Romantic era to place music at the core of their philosophies. Jean-Jacques Rousseau had already paved the way in this regard, and his ideas were further developed and embraced by philosophers such as Schopenhauer, whose ideas influenced Wagner, and Friedrich Nietzsche, who in turn was influenced by Wagner in Germany. These philosophers recognized the profound power of music to tap into the depths of human emotion and touch upon the ineffable aspects of existence. Schopenhauer saw music as a direct expression of the will, the fundamental driving force of the universe. Wagner, inspired by Schopenhauer's philosophy, sought to create music dramas that would invoke these intense emotional responses and transcend rational understanding. Nietzsche, a devoted admirer of Wagner, celebrated the Dionysian power of music and its ability to evoke primal and transcendent experiences. All art aspires to the condition of music, wrote a famous Victorian critic, Walter Pater. All Romantic art tried to capture music's depth and freedom of emotional expression and its conscious, infinite quality. So what you see here is The Bard by John Martin. It's meant to show how man is just dwarfed by nature, and nature is depicted as both menacing and thrilling. While ideals and artistic expression played significant roles in the Romantic era, the marketplace also had its impact on the presentation and dissemination of music. Public concerts, which were first introduced during the Baroque era under artistic patronage, grew in importance during the days of Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven. As the 19th century progressed, the concert hall and opera house became dominant venues for musical performances. Every town of a considerable size had its symphony association, often organized by members of the middle class, such as merchants, uh, government associations and officials, and lawyers. Concert halls built to host symphony concerts became symbols of civic pride, a tradition that continues to this day. In 1891, the New York Symphony, the city's second orchestra after the New York Philharmonic, founded in 1842, proudly presented a 5-concert music festival led by Tchaikovsky in the newly constructed Carnegie Hall. By the end of the century, even intimate musical genres designed for the drawing room or studio found their way onto the concert stage. Concerts featuring lieder or German songs and string quartets became established, although they never held the same level of importance as orchestral concerts. In an era before sound recording technologies, concerts played a crucial role in making music accessible to an increasing number of people. Improved transportation also played a significant role. Musicians began touring even remote areas, including the American West, thanks to enhanced travel options. Italian Romantic opera, in particular, spread far and wide, reaching cities such as New York, Philadelphia, San Francisco, where Italian immigrant dock workers often joined the choruses, Buenos Aires, and even up the Amazon River. The institutionalization of concert life during the Romantic era had both positive and negative aspects. On one hand, it provided a platform for musical performances and increased accessibility to the public. However, it also had a downside in that it led to a gradual conservatism among audiences. In the old aristocratic system, patrons of the arts often had diverse and sometimes whimsical musical tastes. Some patrons encouraged composers to explore new artistic paths, while others simply valued music for its display. However, the concert-going public, primarily composed of the middle class, tended to be more conservative in their musical preferences. They sought value for their ticket purchases, favoring established masterpieces that they were already familiar with and enjoyed. This created a paradoxical situation for composers interested in innovation, which included virtually every composer discussed in the unit so far. They often felt that their work was being neglected by the concert world. There was a sense of resentment towards the audience's influence, while the public's admiration for composers, reaching unprecedented levels, was tinged with mistrust and even hostility. In response to this climate, composer Robert Schumann took a significant step by establishing a magazine to advocate for romantic music. He aimed to combat the public's indifference to serious art and their preference for what he considered flashy trivialities. As the editor, Schumann created a League of David to challenge the Goliath of the concert audience. The term Philistine also gained popularity during this time, referring to those perceived as uncultured. Later on, the music of Liszt and Wagner faced criticism from hostile critics who described it as formless, dissonant, and overly passionate. Similarly, Gustav Mahler's symphonies were repeatedly rejected in Vienna, despite his important position as the head of the opera there. This poster that you see here was for the groundbreaking ceremony of Carnegie Hall in New York. The bearded man visible behind one of the vertical ropes is the famous railroad and steel baron Andrew Carnegie, the man who put up the money to build Carnegie Hall. Indeed, the gap between innovative music and conservative concert public that emerged in the 19th century continued to widen in the 20th century. As we explore the developments of the 20th century, we will witness how the foundations laid during the 19th century shaped the trajectory of modern musical life. During the 19th century, the Romantic era introduced new ideas and artistic expressions that challenged established conventions. However, these innovations often faced resistance from a concert-going public that preferred familiar and established works. This divided between progressive musical ideas and conservative audience preferences set the stage for the musical landscape of the 20th century. In the 20th century, various musical movements and styles emerged, including Impressionism, Expressionism, Serialism, jazz, and more. These developments further expanded the horizons of music and pushed the boundaries of artistic expression. However, as the century progressed, the gap between innovative composers and the concert public grew wider, leading to debates, controversies, and even the rejection of avant-garde works by conservative audiences. This really is still a problem today. In fact, there are musical schools that let people on in based on how avant-garde their music is as composers. And so it's sort of that starving artist, we want to make things for art's sake versus people who want to be able to sell their art. It's still a big struggle today. The 19th century, with its focus on individualism, emotional expression, and the pursuit of the sublime, profoundly influenced the course of modern musical life. The tensions between tradition and innovation, audience expectation and artistic freedom, established masterpieces, and experimental works continue to shape the musical landscape to this day. So that's where we're going to leave things off this week, just around 27 minutes. Next week, we're going to continue here sort of setting up this Romantic period from a historical point of view. And then in the following weeks, we're going to start looking a bit more depth into some different genres within this overarching Romantic genre. And I can't wait for us to do that. So until next week, cheers.